Stephen Curry just dropped 60 points, and in a way that is beautifully illustrative of the absolutely terrible season the Golden State Warriors have had this year, somehow the Warriors managed to lose this game against a not very good Hawks team, again, in case you didn't hear me, with Curry having a 60-piece. Hello everybody, welcome to Asa Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and drop a like on this video. It only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference. Also, before any of that, I don't care about that today, for real. I just, I have to say it. This time around, go check out the main channel video that is going to be out tonight. It will not be out at the time this video goes up, but by the time, if you watch this after it's been out for a couple of hours, it probably is. It is called the Kevin Durant Hater Manifesto. It's going to be over an hour long of me just going over Kevin Durant's career. He recently asked why he's not in the GOAT conversation, and I decided to give him an answer. So that video will be linked in the description once it is available. But again, look out for it. It almost certainly should be out tonight. With that said, we're going to talk about this Curry 60 piece versus the Atlanta Hawks. Also a little bit of discussion around the Atlanta Hawks because I haven't covered them in quite a while. I am also going to be talking about the All-Star reserves as everybody else did a little bit ago, and I'm a little behind on it, but who really cares? I'm also going to talk about some of the LeBron James trade rumors, which is probably nothing, but it's a fun conversation, so might as well have it, and a little bit of brief discussion about Zach LaVine, because it's been a minute since we've tapped in on that stuff. For this Warriors versus Hawks game, I'm going to talk about the Hawks first, because I have a lot to say about the Dubs and the state of that team, so let's just get this Hawks talk out of the way first. Trae Young had a pretty good game in his own right in this one, having 35 points, 8 assists, and hitting 7 three-pointers. He was also hitting some pretty timely shots in the clutch. DeJounte Murray, though, was really the guy who came up in the clutch in this game, hitting a couple of mid-range jumpers late, specifically one at the free throw line off of a handoff from Okongwu, which sent the game into overtime. I mean, it didn't quite send it into overtime. There was a couple of seconds left. Curry got a shot up that did not go in because the entire defense was focused on him, because who the hell else was going to shoot the ball in this game? Really big games from both Onyeka Okongwu and Jalen Johnson. Okongwu had 22 points and 16 rebounds, as well as 2 blocks, and he went 2 for 4 from 3. I believe both of the threes he hit were corner threes. I know for sure at least one of them was. He was really good. He played more minutes than Clint Capella. Jalen Johnson had 21 points, 13 rebounds, and 8 assists. I didn't realize he had that many assists in this game. He threw a couple of nice passes, but that was really impressive to me because that's not really an area of his game that I've thought to be all that well-rounded. Don't get me wrong, I don't think he's a problem area as a playmaker, but it's just not something that I expected him to do exceedingly well, and he definitely did that in this game. Yeah, this game for the Hawks, if it was weird. A lot of it was definitely just the dysfunction of the Warriors, but you kind of saw the vision of this team in this game, like the ideal version of what this Hawks roster would look like. They have been a mess the past couple of years. Really, the DeJounte Murray trade has blown up in their face, gave up too many assets for a player that just does not really fit what Trae Young and what this roster needs. But in this game, he was awesome, and their younger guys were awesome. And, especially as younger guys like Jalen Johnson and Onyeka get better, I start to see the vision with this roster a little more. I've been one who's been advocating for Trae Young to be traded just because I do not really see another route. And I feel like we're just letting the clock go until eventually the inevitable happens. However, I also understand that it's really hard to get a player as talented as Trae Young, even if he's not quite at the threshold of being the best player on a championship team, which, I don't think he is. Even in that context, it's still pretty close to it, and really close to it by contrast to almost every other player in the league. So when you get someone like that, it's difficult to give them up. I do think I would try like one last hurrah with this roster. Give Jalen Johnson that full role. I think he already is getting there at that point. Fucking trade Clint Capella, dude. Like, Onyeka Okongwu is so much better than Clint Capella, and like him playing more minutes, playing better in this game is just further evidence of that. He's got a more well-rounded, modern game. He can stretch the floor sometimes. It's not really been an area of his game that he's established a lot of confidence in, although he does have a mid-range jumper that's definitely pretty fucking reliable, which is not nothing in terms of spacing. Onyeka needs to play more. Clint Capella needs to be gone and out of his way. Jalen Johnson's great. I think if you can flip DeJounte Murray into some kind of decent rotational wing, I do think there is a world where you can make this roster at the very least a competitive and consistent playoff team. But I also, not to just give too much shit to DeJounte Murray, I truly did see, the idea of the trade when it happened. I was like, oh yeah, he plays secondary shot creation to Trey, but yeah, I just don't think that fit is very good as a whole. Good game from the Hawks, but also part of it was the Warriors' dysfunction, because as good as Steph was with his 60 points, as well as 10 3-pointers, which I'm not actually going to highlight too much of the actual scoring that Steph did, because while it was 60 points, I mean, I've watched Steph Curry score 60 points before. I watched him score 50 plenty of times, 40 plenty of times. We know how Steph gets his buckets. It's a bunch of fucking ridiculous threes, a bunch of getting into the lane because teams are afraid of his threes, a bunch of really acrobatic finishes and things like that, couple of floaters here or there. Pretty typical Stephen Curry shit. Despite him having this electric game, the rest of the team was terrible. I do want to highlight one play that happened in this one, because I honestly couldn't believe it worked, and this is just a huge defensive error on the Hawks' part. He got a pick and pop with Kuminga as the ball handler and him as the screener, and he just got so wide open off of it, and I was like, how did you let that happen? I truly could not believe it. Yeah, he did miss a game-winning shot, but I mean, at this point, you've asked him to do so much. I'm not going to give him any shit for missing it. They did go into overtime, and from there, the Hawks just kind of took over in overtime. Curry did what he could, but for the rest of the team, it was essentially Curry versus the Hawks is what I'm getting at. There was another 2 young players in the case of the Warriors who actually did really well. Actually, I don't know how young this Lester guy is, so I do want to say that. And I can't remember the name of the big, but I was talking about Portland's rookie center the other day, the guy who shoots threes really well as a big man. I said that he was a young player. Turns out he's 27, and I want to say, this is not my fault, okay? I could have looked into his age, but it's not something that I typically go out of my way to find out. I just assumed he was a young player because he's a rookie, so that was my mistake. But also, I have a lot of people that I know that are fans of other teams, and in case I don't know a lot about some players on those teams, I ask them about it. And my good friend Jacob, who is the only Portland Trailblazers fan that I really know, neglected to mention this to me, and I asked him about it, and he thought that he was young. So what I'm getting at is it's not this Jacob's fault, it's that Jacob's fault. Side tangent done. Podzminski had 15, 11, and 5, the 11 being rebounds and not assists, which is pretty surprising for a guy his size. And this guy who I haven't heard of called Lester Quiones. One of those two. He had a really big game. He had a couple of mid-range pull-up. I know he hit a couple of threes, and one of them was a half-court shot that he hit at the end of the second half after Trey hit a 3 on him to get those points right back, so that was really cool. Other than those guys, everyone for the Warriors sucked, and I mean sucked. Klay Thompson, 4 for 19. Andrew Wiggins had a terrible game. I believe he had like 4 points, 2 points, like 1 for 9 from the field, and I actually just went and calculated this. The entire Warriors team, outside of Steph's shooting, so from the field, they went 28 for 74, which is 38% shooting. And from 3, they shot 8 for 33 from outside, which is 24%. This team sucks. Stephen Curry is awesome, and if Stephen Curry wasn't on this roster, the Warriors would be, I guess the Pistons suck so much I can't necessarily say they'd be the worst team in the league, but they'd at the very least be in that bottom feeder category. I think the Spurs would be better than this Warriors team without Steph. It's just such a fucking terrible team. I realize they were without Chris Paul and I think Gary Payton as well, but there's just no excuse for how bad this roster is. And like, I understand that Steph has had good rosters put around him throughout his career, so I'm not going to sit here and act like woe is him throughout his career. They've done a great job in general. I have always felt as though if you have a superstar tier player, you always without question, without any ounce of hesitance, have to do everything in your power to put the best possible roster around that guy. And the Warriors are not doing that, to say the least. And I start to wonder if Stephen Curry would ever potentially leave a scenario like this. Because to be honest, obviously we know Steph's like 35, coming up on 36 at this point. He's an older player, but I truly don't see any reason why he needs to slow down significantly over the next couple of years of his career. And I think so long as he has that superstar level production, he has every right to want a different environment and want different players around him and a better roster. He's already made comments to the media that suggest he's like more critical of what's happening than he really ever has been before. Something like it would be insanity for this same roster to be back over the trade deadline, which is not the type of comment that Stephen Curry typically makes. It's not uncommon for other superstars to say shit like that, but Steph doesn't usually do that. So it's definitely waning on him, I think. It's very disappointing to me. Stephen Curry is my second favorite player of all time, so obviously I want to see a good team around him, but also just in general, especially for a legendary player like him, disappointing to see their talent kind of wasted. And we saw exactly that in this game. Moving on to the All-Star reserves, this has probably been talked about ad nauseum, so I'm not going to harp on it too much, and I really don't have particularly unique takes. You know, the main two snubs, who are De'Aaron Fox and Trae Young, are exactly who I think the main two snubs are, just like everybody else does. The West not having De'Aaron Fox is pretty crazy. I'm surprised, I really am, that Karl-Anthony Towns made this team. Don't get me wrong, Cat's been really good this year. He's also shooting like 45% from three, 22 and 10, all that. He's a good player, don't get me wrong. But he's also Minnesota's third best player, and I don't think it's particularly close. As you know, my point of view on that is this: the Timberwolves are a towards the middle of the pack offense, sometimes better than average, but around average, and they are a excellent defense. Yeah, they are currently number 1 in defensive rating and number 18th in offensive rating. So if I'm looking at a roster like that, and we have 3 star tier players, 2 of which are offensively minded, and 1 of which is one of the greatest defensive players of all time, still playing some of the best defense of his career, and being the number 1 defensive anchor on the team. If the defense is great and the offense is mid, I would rather there be representation for that defensive player, and Rudy Gobert is just way more important for Minnesota's success than Karl-Anthony Towns is. I have slowly over time grown more and more tired of what I will call the fetishization of points per game. Like, the amount of people who think your scoring average needs to start with a 2 at least. You know, with it being double digits, you can't average 2 points per game. What I'm saying, you know what I'm fucking saying here. It has to start with a 2 at least, otherwise you're just not a valid basketball player. It truly feels like there's a lot of people who carry that perspective, and it kind of drives me fucking nuts. Rudy Gobert is the second best player on the Timberwolves. Obviously no problem with Ant being there, he should be there. Cat is just, not to say that he's not having all-star level production, because he is, let's be real. He's the third best player on this team. So there is that aspect of it. The other thing is, yeah, De'Aaron Fox needed to be in this game. That's just honestly disrespectful that he is not. He's currently averaging 27 points, 4 rebounds, 5.5 assists, nearly 2 steals. He is shooting 47% from the field and 38% from 3 on 8 attempts per game. He overall has a true shooting percentage of right around league average at 58%. 27-5, the Sacramento Kings don't get any all-star representation. I know I said I'm not like a huge proponent of that. However, this is a good team, and he's such a good player, and he is definitely a much better player than Karl-Anthony Towns is. So yeah, I would sub Cat for De'Aaron Fox. As for the Eastern Conference, yeah, very disrespectful to Trae Young that he didn't make this list. He puts up way too good of numbers. I understand that the team is not the best in the world, but it's good enough to where 27 and 11 is good enough to make an all-star team. He's also having a career year from 3. He's 2% better than league average in true shooting, 38% from 3 on 9 attempts per game. I just don't fucking get it. I really don't. He is so good. I realize that we've decided we don't like Trae Young, but we also need to recognize talent when it's in front of us, and he's got the goods. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think he's quite a superstar tier player, but he's very close to it, and he's definitely better than Jaylen Brown. He's definitely better than Paulo. He's definitely better than Julius. I don't know. I don't get it. Maybe this is me being a hater here, but I don't really understand why Jaylen Brown made the All-Star team. That's kind of like not even kind of. It's definitely a seniority thing. The guy made it because he has the history, but he's had a down year just because there's less shots for him. Right back down normal to the normal Jaylen Brown, not the 27 point per game Jaylen Brown. And if you ask me, he is straight up their 4th best player almost every fucking time I watch the Celtics. I don't know if this is the case every game, but I've probably watched 15 Celtics games or so this year, maybe 20 even. And every time without fail, actually not every time. I do remember I watched a performance where he had like damn near 40 and he was the best player. But outside of that, Derek White and Kristaps Porzingis matter more for them winning the game than Jaylen Brown does. And again, we're getting to this point per game fetishization. Neither Derek nor Kristaps average quite 20. I think Kristaps is at like 19. In terms of actually impacting the game, I know who's going to matter more for Boston, and it's not going to be fucking Jaylen Brown. Last thing I'll say about this, I do love that Bam ended up being Miami's representative. I thought it would maybe end up being Jimmy instead, but it seems right to me. Bam's been their best player this year. He has been kind of suspect lately, and apparently that's a trend for him around this time of the calendar year. Either way, right pick there. There are also obviously other guys that got snubbed, and like guys who I said should be replaced, like Jaylen, like Paulo, theoretically should be in this game. However, there's just not enough fucking roster spots, and we've been talking about this plenty. There needs to be more roster spots. There needs to be more representation. There are just simply more players who are reaching all-star caliber, and I think it's unfair to those guys that this is what's happening. I realize the idea of like the standard for all-star raising and like using that to a degree as a justification for it, but at a certain point, like especially if you consider the fact that, you know, the 12 roster spots for each team was established when there were like 20-something teams in the league. We have expanded teams. We have expanded the size of roster. Players are more talented than ever. So it only makes sense to expand the All-Star game as well. And I don't think more great players is a problem personally, and I don't think representing more great players is a problem. All right, let's briefly talk about these LeBron James trade rumors. The more specific rumors lately have been involving him going to the New York Knicks. Seems like we've been doing this like pretty much every year since the Russ trade, where we're just like, would it actually make sense just to blow this thing up? And it seems like those conversations never get anywhere near being serious. But this time there was actual like kerfuffle, I'll say, in the media. I believe the GM or whatever was asked about it. I think LeBron had a couple of comments about wanting to play for the Knicks in the past. So that's interesting. I think once more, nothing is going to come of it. But I do want to say, man, I don't think it'd be a bad idea. I really, really don't think it would be a bad move for either party here to part ways, because to be honest, as I've been saying for the Lakers, it really just feels like we are Rudy, I'm recording. What do you have to say to the people?
Let me in.
The door's unlocked.
I don't have a way to enter your apartment.
The door is unlocked.
Downstairs?
Oh, you don't... Where the fuck was I? Rude of him to just want me to let him in the building. I think it only makes sense. It seems like we've been running out the clock for LeBron to leave the Lakers. Just trade the guy, let him go somewhere where he can actually win. I'd rather see the last couple of years of LeBron's career not be wasted entirely on these bad teams. Not to take any level of like blame or association or like his part that he played in the failure of the Lakers the past couple of years. You know, LeBron played a huge part in that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean I want to see him sit there and deal with the consequences forever. I'm sure other people would because they hate LeBron James, but I'd rather see great players continue to do great things for as long as they're in the league. And I think this is really the best way to do it. I realize that the Lakers team did beat the Celtics without Bron and AD, but in general, that supporting cast just is not good enough. I would like to see this team be blown up personally. And I actually kind of like the idea of the Knicks fit, because I've been saying that like they can't really meet the threshold because they're a superstar. They don't have a superstar, like meet the threshold of being a contender. LeBron can be that superstar. I do think he is teetering on that line at this point because of his age, but he at the very least can bring in that superstar factor in spurts when they actually need him to. Last thing, real quick, because I gotta go let Rudy in the building. Zach LaVine got a season-ending injury, but is still apparently going to be traded. I think it's a season-ending surgery is from what I understand, but apparently the Pistons are still interested in him. And recently there have been discussions surrounding Bojan Bogdanovic and Joe Harris. So all those rumors about like Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren being potentially in the deal, I thought those were bullshit immediately. Like the Pistons have made terrible trades, like a lot of bad trades. But this deal, I knew they weren't going to go that far. Like, that's a level of incompetence that just, like, demands the entire franchise being burned down. So if you traded a legitimate young asset with star upside for Zach LaVine, you're stupid. But Joe Harris and Bojan Bogdanovic, not that bad. All I really had to say about this, I feel vindicated in that I have been saying this stuff about Zach LaVine the past 2 years or so, and I made a whole video on it, obviously, that did really well. So it feels vindicating to be right about Zach LaVine. You know, I have the same ego that a lot of people who do this job do. I like being right about things. It brings me satisfaction and makes me feel like a smart, fancy boy. I don't love watching a guy who my franchise invested in for years and years and years be worth Joe Harris and Bojan Bogdanovic. That is a bit of an L. Only positive I'll take away from it, I've been dying to see the Bulls become more of a three-point shooting team. They've done it more and more this year, and Joe Harris and Bogey are both excellent high-volume three-point shooters. That will be cool, at least. But yeah, that's it. Shout out to Alec. No way I just did it again. I'm cutting that.
No way I just did that again. I'm totally cutting. I don't even know what you think you mean by you're cutting that, asshole. I have control over the fucking edit. And I'm not even going to do a whole thing where I like pretend to be mad and tell everybody to go watch Kenny's videos. Pod fucking Minsky, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. The same guy who like 2 videos ago kept saying Sabrina versus Steph because he was going to have a fucking aneurysm if he even tried to say Ionescu. I swear to God, this guy, if he looks at a name that isn't Johnson, Curry, or fucking James, his head fucking explodes. I'm not even going to give him the floor to end this video. I'm going to do it. Alex is going to end the fucking video. Go watch the new main channel video. It's going to be in the description. Go listen to the Coping Hour. It's a great podcast. It's my favorite NBA. It's hardly even a fucking NBA podcast, by the way, Jacob. We do real shit on there. Geopolitics with a little splash of basketball. Alex, by the way. Oh, I'm cutting that. I'm going to fucking redo it. I'm sure you are. Fucker.